Saga from Armenia. The Princess Peri and the Rich Merchant. Chapter 6: The Trap, Destruction and the Revenge. The next morning, the princes put on men's clothes, gathered a good amount of gold and other necessary things, said goodbye to the bridesmaids and other people in the palace, and started the trip, accompanied by the faithful servant. 3 days had passed, when she finally reached the capital of the neighboring kingdom, where her husband was living. Arriving at that capital, she rented one of the best houses and asked the servant to spread the rumor that the son of a mighty king had arrived there. So, the king, when learned of the arrival of the foreign princes in the capital, immediately sent him an invitation to visit the palace. The princess then addressed, without delay, to the king's palace, where she was received with all the deserved honors. The king then wanted to know the cause that had moved him to that country, and this was your answer. I am heir to the throne in my country. And as I am still young, with little experience in administration, I am visiting different kingdoms to know their laws and institutions, and thus, instruct me. As I have heard very well of your kingdom, I hurried to come here. The king heard this with pleasure and approval. And, that same day, was already known throughout the capital that the foreign prince had been very well received by the king. The princess decided then organize a magnificent banquet, and to it she ordered to invite all the counselors and great businessmen. At the moment the guests began to arrive, the servant, according to the princess's instructions, should stand guard by the entrance door, to identify the possible presence of the wrongdoer, who had dishonorably taken over of her husband's riches. She believed that, thanks to these riches, he had probably already turned into a businessman, and even a counselor. But unfortunately, he was not among the visitors. The next day, the princess offered another banquet, and to it invited all the merchants of the city. But the bastard did not appear. On the third day, she organized another banquet, intended now for the manual workers. On the fourth day, he offered another banquet to all the poor in the city. And on the fifth day, another banquet to all who, having no profession, spend their time doing nothing. But the scoundrel had not appeared in any of them. So, the princess, already in a state of despair, asked the servant to go through the city streets, in search of the possible place where the bastard might be. It occurred then that, when the servant was passing in front of a certain house, he finally got his eyes on the bandit, accompanied by several other evildoers. He was standing there and making ironic observations about the people who were passing by, while his companions produced sonorous laughter. The servant approached them and said, as the princess had instructed, "Our prince leaves this city tomorrow. Everyone has visited him, but not you, that did not appear at the banquets offered by him. In view of this, he asked me to look for you and invite you to the last banquet, that he will offer today. On leaving this city, the prince wants to leave everyone a good impression of him." The bandit and his companions then said they had been out of town, and would now be very happy for the invitation. Upon learning that the scoundrel had finally been found, and would attend the banquet, the princess was very happy and began the preparation. She then decided that, in the right moment, they would be granted with a drink mixed with a sleeping pill, for everyone to fall immediately in a deep sleep. She sent for a qualified goldsmith and asked him to record in the cups her father's insignia. The goldsmith then went to the workshop and, after a while, the work had already been done. The banquet began and, as soon as the bandits fell asleep, the scoundrel was undressed and the princess, with her own hands, stamped the insigne on his back, so that the traces of the incandescent stamp did not appear in his body as injuries. A doctor had already been summoned, in order to grease the grooves with a special ointment, so that the injuries were healed as neatly as possible, leaving in place only the mark itself. One day later, the visitors woke up and, thanking the princess for the hospitality and the welcome, apologized for the inconvenience and went out each one to his side. Until now, the merchant knew nothing what was going on, nor that his wife was in town, because the servant had received the order of not letting him know that. But the princess, not wanting to delay her revenge, went to the king and said to him, "Lord King, although I said I was visiting foreign countries to know their laws and administrations, the real reason for my trip is the fact that one of my father's servants has taken over several assets of my family, among them my mother's golden ring, and disappeared without leaving any traces. I would then like your majesty ordered all residents that gather in rows in a square, so I can identify between them the said thief, in case he still stays in town." The king then ordered all the city's inhabitants to gather in lines in the large square in front of the palace. Even the merchant, who was almost blind, hunchbacked and white-haired, was led there. When the servant pointed at her the presence of her husband there in one of the lines, tears ran down her cheeks, but she managed to suppress her sobs. After examining in various rows all who had come there, she could finally identify the author of all those misfortunes. She then pointing him to the king and told him, "Lord King, there is the criminal." The voice that expressed those words seemed well known to the merchant. And it was then as if he had grown up with joy, and suddenly, straightened to its full extent. This man paid with evil all the good that was done to him. I ask then, Lord King, to have his pockets examined, for I know that he keeps my ring there." When the merchant heard the word ring uttered by that well-known voice, her hair went black again, of so much joy. All these changes were not going unnoticed in the eyes of the princess, and she was feeling very gratified. The princess's voice rang again, "Lord King, if there is still doubt as to the truth of these my words, make this man take off his shirt, so you can see behind his back the insignia of my father." The king then determined that the culprit was stripped of his shirt, and they all screamed in amazement, when they saw the marks stamped on the bandit's back. The bastard then acknowledged all his guilt and explained how it had happened. When the merchant heard the bandit's statements, his vision returned totally to normal, and he felt young again. So, letting himself fall into his wife's arms, he covered her with passionate kisses. The whole people rejoiced with the admirable victory of the two lovers and was enchanted by the heroism of the princess disguised as prince. That presented itself now as the wife of the suffering merchant. The king was so moved with the demonstration of loyalty and affection of both spouses who decided to honor them with the most splendid banquet that day and those who came later. The main subject discussed in the city it was just the related with the coming of that foreign prince. By sentence of the king, the author of the misfortunes caused to the merchant and his wife would have to return to them all belongings of them illegally subtracted, and be executed. However, both the prince and the princess thought the sentence might have been less stringent, and asked the king to revoke the death sentence. After thanking the king and the entire royal family for such an honorable welcome, the prince and the princess said goodbye to them and prepared for the return to the country of origin. In the exit, the princess took her golden ring from her finger and gave it to the queen as a symbol of friendship. In the country where they were born, they lived for many years, happy and surrounded by many children. Since then, the happiness and affection of the Princess Peri and her husband have become the favorite subject throughout Armenia. And until today, it is customary to say, between the Armenians, "Happy is he who has a wife like Peri." The end.